Welcome to the Steps Podcast, a space to enjoy empowering conversations on spiritual growth and healing. These conversations are based on the Steps course, a 12-step program designed to bring freedom from negative thought patterns and behaviours, equipping participants with tools to live a more joyful and hope-filled life. In this series, Lou chats individually with a few participants to hear their stories of journeying towards freedom. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Today, I chat to Grace, and Grace has been working on perfectionism in Steps. And we had such a good conversation all about the reality of living with perfectionism in a culture that really values us striving towards perfection, and how do you get that balance? We talked about challenging faulty thinking, and we talked about the importance of maintaining freedom once we've done Steps. It was such a good conversation. Really hope that you enjoy this episode. Hey Grace, so good to chat to you today. Thanks so much for agreeing to have this conversation about your Steps journey. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as you said, my name's Grace. In my everyday, I work as a solicitor. I work as a lawyer in the city. And I love my job. I really enjoy it. It comes with some stresses from time to time, but by and large, I very much love what I do. I attend Christchurch, London, and that's actually how I found out about the Steps course in the first place. And so outside, when people always ask me about like my life and what I do, the main things are church and work, which are kind of my staples. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Amazing. And what was it that led you to the Steps course in the first place? I know you mentioned that you heard about it at church, but what was it that kind of clicked for you that made you want to go on it?
Yeah, so I remember seeing some videos, and hearing some people talk about the Steps course. And a lot of them had said, oh, someone recommended it to me and said, oh, you should go on this course because of X, Y, and Z. And I didn't have that experience, but I do remember watching one of the promotional videos, just explaining what the course was about. And the person in the video was talking about something that I had dealt with myself and was dealing with at the time. And I had never really thought about going on a Steps course. If I'm being honest, I never really thought about that being something that would help me. But having seen that video and the way she spoke about coming out on the other side of Steps and how beneficial it was, I kind of thought to myself, I might as well just give it a go. I've got nothing to lose. Like, it's either going to be really helpful or it's not. I'm not going to lose anything from trying. So that was actually the reason why I decided to do it in the first place. That was kind of one of the driving factors. And I think in general, I was able to come to that conclusion when I saw that video, because I was just quite tired of myself. I was quite tired of some of the behavior patterns that I was noticing. And I just got to a point where I was like, I've tried to do everything I can think of to try and fix this, and it's not working. And I was getting frustrated with myself for not being able to fix it. And so when this opportunity presented itself to help me to fix this issue, I was like, why not? I'm gonna give it a go.
I really resonate with that whole idea of being tired of yourself almost. I really felt like that as well when I did Steps. I was like, oh, I just want some level of change. Like, I've tried to do it by myself and I can't. When you talk about it was coming out in behaviours, what was that? What did that look like?
So I was working on this the second time I did Steps. So I've done it twice. The most recent time I did it, I was working on perfectionism. And I had begun to notice the way it played out, especially as it pertains to my work. So as I said, I'm a lawyer in my everyday. And I think that the culture sometimes in law is that we do things perfectly and we get things done right. And that's kind of seen as like the natural way to be. But that was producing a lot of anxiety for me. And I was finding myself just never being satisfied with what I had done because it just didn't feel good enough. And I started to notice this really negative mind frame around anything I did that wasn't praised, or anything I did that wasn't like, said to be really, really good. I started to feel like I was a bit of a failure. And I think that definitely kind of started to rear its head a lot more when I actually qualified. And I, trained to be a solicitor is a really long process. But when you qualify and you get all this responsibility and you get given all these things to do, and you're looking to like the partners and the senior associates to tell you that you're doing things well. And if you're not getting that, then you start to kind of feel like you're not doing very well. And that just led me to be really anxious. And I think one of the most practical examples I can give is that I would find myself needing to write an email to a client or to someone, and I would sit on that email and redraft it and redraft it and redraft it several times because it just didn't seem good enough. And then when I eventually send it, if I didn't get some sort of acknowledgement from someone about what I had put in, like the advice I'd given or something, then I would feel like, oh, I knew it wasn't good enough. I should have just tried again or anything like that. But I found myself just being stuck a lot of the time and like just not feeling like I could progress things because nothing was ever good enough. And that started to kind of weave itself into some other things I had begun to notice in myself. And I had noticed that this kind of perfectionism was also linked to some self-esteem issues that I had, and the fact that I was basing my perception of myself and my self-worth on how good I was at doing things. And I think, yeah, work is probably one of the places that I had started to notice it the most. And I think the more I began to notice it, the more I was like, I want this to stop here. I don't want this to spread out into anything else, because it's bad enough that this is happening in my job. I don't want this happening in my friendships or my relationships or like my, relationship with family members. I don't want that. So those are probably some of the most practical examples I can give of seeing this at play practically.
It's so hard with something like perfectionism, isn't it? Because like you mentioned, it's something that's celebrated often in the world of work, or even if you go on Instagram and or Pinterest or something, you see these beautiful people and you just think it creates this culture where achievement is really celebrated, perfection obviously is celebrated, and it's just like the image that I have in my mind is like, a hamster wheel going round and round and round, because it's so exhausting. And I think what you highlight is something that so many people, and myself as well, have really struggled with, this kind of wanting to meet and exceed other people's expectations. And then when we feel like we don't, or we struggle to, like the inner dialogue that goes round in our minds of not doing well enough or need to try harder. And it's just such a joy stealer, isn't it? So yeah, I resonate a lot. So you're working on something like perfectionism, like what was that like going through the 12 steps? Was there anything that particularly stood out to you in any of the weeks? Like, how was that? Because one thing to say quickly is that I am also a recovering perfectionist. And when I went through the steps process, I wasn't working on perfectionism, but I knew that I struggled with it. But it made me want to go through the process perfectly and get everything right and not do anything wrong, because I wanted to be fixed at the end. So I'd be interested to hear your take on how you found that.
I resonate with that. And that was something that I was kind of dealing with as well while I was doing the process. I think I had to be really aware of the fact that I'm working on perfectionism. And I had to remind myself of that every single week in the way I approach the preparation for each of the sessions. It was I think it was definitely hard. I've never really worked on anything like this before, because like you said, it's something that's praised. And so it actually took me a while to even realize that I was a bit of a perfectionist. I just said, oh, I'm hardworking. That's kind of how I've always put it down. And so it took me a while to even admit that. So then to bring that into the steps was quite difficult, because I found sometimes it really hard to kind of figure out what I'm supposed to be doing, because I didn't even know this was a thing before. Like I didn't even know this was an issue. I think of the steps that I found the most, all of them are really useful, but I think the step that every time I've done it has always created the most amount of change is always step 5 for me. I think going into the confessions and being able to just get like, I always try to make my confessions really raw and like just write them exactly how I would if I was, praying, and just always try and make it as genuine as possible. And I always do that. And it just feels like this massive weight that you kind of carry around, especially I even think as part of my confession this year, I was even like, God, I'm sorry for trying to be a perfectionist even while doing steps. Like it's something that I'm struggling with. But even just to pray that prayer and bring that to God, it was just such a relieving feeling of just knowing that I'm not doing this on my own anyway. Like the work I'm trying to do, I'm not doing it on my own. I think aside from five, I always find the itinerary very useful. Again, I think it's probably just because of the way I am. Like I quite have a personality of trying to I like to list and put things down and have things in order. And so I definitely think the itinerary is always helpful for me, and was every time I've done it, even when I wasn't working on perfectionism, it was always one of those defining steps, because it really helps you to just lay everything out and you can kind of look at it and you can kind of see. But yeah, I think those are probably the two that I definitely felt the most, I guess, like in line with, or that they were the most useful for me, because I guess of the way I'm wired, but also just because of what I was working on.
I think as well with step 5, it's one where, so in step 5, we make the confession to God and to someone else and to ourselves. And I think without even realizing it, I don't know about you, but I certainly experienced I was carrying around such a weight. And it's that, I think you even said that, it's the releasing it almost is such just a freeing feeling of being able to just lay it all out. Like you say it as it is. And then to know that we've been forgiven is such a wonderful feeling, isn't it? Yeah. And around step 10, we obviously look at maintaining freedom and the inventory, and step 6, 7, you're looking at habits. Are there any particular new habits or rhythms that you put in place to help you maintain freedom from perfectionism?
Yeah, so one of the main ones that I've been trying to practice is to have a barrier to my thoughts, if that makes sense. A lot of the time, my issues with perfectionism they come from my mind. It's not necessarily just what I'm doing, it's the thought process around what I'm doing. And so I've kind of had to put into practice, which I started during steps and have continued, just this barrier to a thought that comes, and dealing with the thought when it comes, and not kind of stewing on something or thinking it and then going along and then eventually catching it. No, I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, the moment it comes into my mind, I have to stop it then. And I have found that since finishing steps, since doing steps 1, I've been able to identify those thoughts much easier. Those thoughts that come from not, so for example, let's say I've done something and it's not been received the way I would expect it to be received, and I've not kind of gotten the praise that I thought I would get. I've noticed that thought process of, it's because it wasn't good enough, straight away. Whereas before, I would kind of just run with that and let myself believe that that was the reason why I didn't get that. But now I notice it straight away, and I already have, I think my process is to have a truth to speak over the lie and have that barrier in place ready, so that when that thought comes and it's like, it's because it wasn't good enough, I already have something to counter it straight away. And most of the time is, no, it was absolutely fine. There was nothing wrong with what you did. You send the email, you've done what you need to do, or you did the work, you did what you need to do. It's going to benefit the client. You're fine. And I kind of had to get into that mind frame of speaking truth over lies. Sometimes, a lot of the time, I will also use Bible verses to speak truth over the lies as well, because I find that scripture, so when I say scripture, I mean Bible verses, I know them to be true, and I know these things to be completely sound. And so sometimes that's all I can use to, not sometimes, most of the time, if not all the time, that's all I can use to really speak truth over the lies that I'm allowing myself to think. I think that's probably the one thing that has been the most, I've noticed the most since I've finished steps. It's just that barrier, this block that comes straight away. As soon as the thought comes, it's there. And that's something that I learned through steps and have continued since finishing. Yeah.
I once heard this person say it's always awareness before change. So as we become more aware of whether it's faulty thinking or faulty behaviors, it gives us that consciousness, and then we can choose to do something differently. And I love that the example that you gave, you've kind of slowed your process down in that you've been able to take notice of, okay, what are the thoughts, and slow down enough to be like, no, actually, I need to like create a barrier between kind of what I'm thinking and what I'm telling myself that's true. And I can totally see how that reframing of it, maybe you don't feel initially loads better, but like the consistency of doing it again and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I imagine though it's easy to break that thought pattern now because you're in the habit of doing it.
That's exactly it. I think the first times I had done it, I would find myself being back in that thought process. Like, it wasn't the first time I did it, I was straight away like, no, I'm fine. It does take a while. And I think that sometimes discipline and repetitiveness in doing something stretches your capacity to be able to do something much easier in the future. And that's what this was. Like, I think the more I did it, the more my capacity to just be like, nope, barriers came with ease because I have just been doing it for a while. And yeah, it wasn't an overnight thing that just happened and I was great. It's something that is continuous, but that's what steps is. Like, it's, you figure out along the process what you need to do, and then you continue working on it as you go on. And the more you work, the easier it gets to deal with whatever it is that you were working on in the first place.
Yeah. I think sometimes we can want to take the easy option and not put the work in, essentially. I know that that's been the case for me in the past, and it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to face up to the things that we're struggling with and to remind ourselves of it. But actually, I really agree that so much of finding freedom is actually putting the work in to be free in the longer term, rather than just ignoring and distracting ourselves away from and burying and doom scrolling instead, which I know can be so tempting, can't it? If you were going to give an encouragement to someone who is maybe either struggling at the moment, or maybe they're considering doing steps but not sure about, this whole process, what would you say to them?
I think I would say kind of what I said at the start, which is that you really do have nothing to lose. Like, I know that sounds a bit doom and gloom sometimes, but you will only get better by doing steps. I really do feel that, like, there's no negative to trying to better yourself or to trying to fix an unhelpful behavior pattern. There's no negative to doing the work to try and help you. So I think my encouragement is that, first of all, if you're noticing that you have particular behavior patterns that you don't like and they're unhelpful, like we've just spoken about, you do have to do some sort of work to try and get out of that. And the question is, do you want to do that work by yourself, ultimately fail, and then feel bad about yourself? Or do you want to do that work through a course and something like STEPS that's literally designed to help you maintain and get out of these kind of unhelpful behavior patterns, and then not have the associated like frustration and negativity that you might feel if you just try and keep doing things on your own, or just keep ignoring things and not trying to deal with them? To me, I kind of see it as like two routes. Like, you can either continue how you are and squash it and doom scroll or whatever you want to do, or you can just try and fix it yourself with all manner of different things that you've probably been trying for a really long time and are not working because you're in this headspace, which means that something isn't working. That's one path. And then the other path is, well, everything I've tried isn't working. What have I got to lose by trying this? And I would just encourage you to give it a go. Just try, see what comes from it, and you'll be so surprised. Like, it is work and you do have to put the work in, but I don't think that you can have a negative outcome from putting work in to better yourself. I just don't think that that's possible. I think if you're putting work in to try and be a better version of yourself and unlearn these things that have been causing you pain and causing other people in your life pain and causing you anxiety and stress and worry, you have nothing to lose by trying to get out of that space. And so I would just encourage people to go for it. You have nothing to lose. I think that's like I've said that like 4 times. That is probably my main stance. You have nothing to lose. Go for it. see where you get and put the work in and see how beneficial it can be to you.
Grace, that's so helpful. Thank you so much for having this chat. I feel really encouraged about your story, but also it's reminded me of kind of how much Steps has done for me as well. I think sometimes it brings it, like when we chat to each other, it brings out our own stories and some of the freedom that we've received. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. What I loved about chatting with Grace is that her story is so relatable. Like, I resonated with so much of what she said, because I think perfectionism is really difficult. And I think we often do think that the more perfect you are, the better things are. But actually, we don't think about the impact on our mental health when we're really striving for perfection. And so I really love chatting to her about that. And I think what she was saying about challenging faulty thinking in terms of how she stayed free from perfectionism as she's gone through the Steps process, I think that was a really important thing to catch. And I really love that habit that she's created. So much so, I'm going to look at how I can bring more of that into my own journey. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
The Steps podcast is brought to you by Steps Global, a non-profit charity that is funded by a group of Steps supporters. These are people who have experienced personal transformation through the Steps and who want to share these tools more broadly so that anyone can find freedom from unhelpful thought and behaviour patterns. To join us or share a one-time gift, visit www.stepscourse.org/support. If you are interested in finding out more about the Steps course, including upcoming courses, sign up to our mailing list via our website. Thanks for listening.